that despite her general attitude of cordiality, their attentions were not what Mrs. Hay so much desired as those of the major commanding. Twice had he been invited to dine within the week of Nanette's coming. Once he accepted, the second time he begged off on plea of a previous engagement subsequently made to go shooting with Blake. It was the bachelor heart and home of Major Webb to which Mrs. Hay would have laid vicarious siege. Small blame to her, for that indomitable cross-examiner, Mrs. Wilkins, wife and manager of the veteran ranker now serving as post quartermaster, had wormed out of Mrs. Hay the admission that Nanette had no fortune. She was the only daughter of a half brother, very dear to Mrs. Hay, whom she had lost, she said, long years before. To do her justice, it was quite apparent that Miss Flower was no party to the plan, for though she beamed on Webb as she did on all, she frankly showed her preference for the younger officers who could dance as well as ride, and either dancing or riding was her glory. She danced like a sylph. She seemed to float about the room as though on air. She rode superbly, and shirked no leap that even Ray and Field took with lowered hands and close gripping knees. She was joyous, laughing, radiant with all the officers, and fairly glowed with cordiality for all the women. But it speedily developed that she would rather dance with Field than any of the others, probably because he was by far the best waltzer, and to ride with him because, Ray expected, there was none to excel him in the saddle. 10 days had she been at Frayne, and within that time had become as thoroughly at ease and home as though it had been her abiding place since babyhood. It was plain to see that Big Bill Hay almost worshipped this lovely protege of the wife he more than worshipped. It was plain to see that Webb uneasily held aloof, as though fearful of singeing his shriveling wings. It was plain to see that the hitherto indomitable Mrs. Wilkins was puzzled. It was not so plain to see that there were two women at the post on whom Miss Flower's charms made slight impression, Mesdames Blake and Ray, two wise young matrons who were known to have few secrets from each other and no intimacies, or rather no confidences, with any other woman at Fort Frayne, Mrs. Dade possibly excepted. But what they thought their liege lord stood ready to swear to, and it was to them Webb turned in his perplexity when it became apparent that his young adjutant was ensnared. It was to Ray he promptly opened his heart, as that veteran of a dozen Indian campaigns, then drawing his fourth fogey, came hastening out to join the commander. "Here's confirmation of the telegram. Read that, Ray," said Webb, handing him the despatch from Fort Beecher. "Then come with me to Field's. He's missing." "Missing!" cried Ray in consternation, as he hurriedly opened the page. "In God's name, what do you mean?" "I mean he isn't in quarters and hasn't been in bed tonight. Now I need him, and it's 2 o'clock." Even as he spoke, the voice of the sentry at the guardhouse rang out the watch call through the still and sparkling night. It was taken up by No. 2 back of the storehouses, and his "All's well" was still echoing among the foothills, prolonged and powerful, when No. 3 down at the quartermaster's corral began his soldier song. And so, alert, cheery, reassuring, the sentries sent their deep-voiced assurance on its unbroken round to the waking guardian at the southwest angle, and as his final "All's well" went rolling away over the bluff, stream and prairie, Ray lifted a grave and anxious face from the fateful paper. Lame Wolf out? That's bad in itself. He's old Red Cloud's nephew and a brute at best. Stabber's people there yet? he suddenly asked, whirling on his heel and gazing westward. "Can't make out, even with my glasses. All dark as pitch among the cottonwoods, but Kennedy, who made the ride, says he saw smokes back of Eagle Butte just before sunset." "Then you can bet they won't be there at dawn, the Warriors at least. Of course the women, the kids and old men will stay, if only for a blind. He had 40 fighting men, and Wolf's got at least 200. What started the row?" "The arrest of those two young bucks on charge of killing Finn, the sheep herder, on the Piney last week. I don't believe the Sioux began it. There's a bad lot among those damn rustlers," said Webb, snapping the glass into its well worn case. "But no matter who starts, we have to finish it. Old Plodder is worried and wants help. Reckon I'll have to send you, Ray." "Ready whenever you say, sir," was the prompt and soldierly reply. Even marriage had not taken the edge from Ray's keen zest for campaigning. "Shall I have out my sergeant and cooks at once? We'll need to take rations." "Yes, but wait with me till I wire the chief at Laramie. Come to the office." So saying, the post commander turned and strode away. The captain glanced at the upper window where the light now dimly burned, but blind and window were open, and a woman's form appeared. "It's all right, matey," called the captain softly. "May have to start out on scout at daybreak, that's all. Home soon," and with a reassuring wave of the hand, turned again to his stanch friend and commander. "I hate to send you again," said Webb. "You were out in June, and the others have had only short scouts since." "Don't bother. What's a cavalryman for? Shall we? I can't believe it, somehow," and Ray stopped, glanced inquiringly at the major, and then nodded toward the doorway of the third house on the row. The ground floor was occupied by Field as his quarters, the upstairs room by Putney and Ross. "Come in," said the major, briefly, and pushing through the gate they softly entered the dark hallway and struck a light in the front room. A wood fire was smoldering on the andirons in the wide brick chimney place. An open book, face downward, was on the center table. Two embroidered slippers lay as though hurriedly kicked off, one under the sofa beyond the mantelpiece, the other halfway across the worn carpet. Striking another match at the doorway, Ray passed on to the little inner room, the bedchamber. On the bed, carelessly thrown, were the young officer's best and newest forage cap, undress uniform coat, and trousers. He had used them during the evening when calling at the Hays'. On the floor were the enameled leather buttoned boots he wore on such occasions. The bed was otherwise untouched. Other boots and shoes in orderly rows stood against the wall beside the plain, unpainted wardrobe. The spurred riding boots and the knee-tight breeches were gone. Turning back to the front room, Ray found the major, his face gray and disturbed, holding forth to him an open envelope. Ray took it and glanced at the superscription, "Lieutenant Beverly Field, Fort Frayne," and returned it without a word. Both knew the strange, angular, slashing handwriting at a glance, for both had seen and remarked it before. It was Nanette Flower's. Dropping the envelope on the table he had found it on the floor Webb led the way to the open air. There was then no time to compare views. There stood the sergeant. "Sir," said he, with a snap of the gloved left hand at the brown tube nestling in the hollow of the shoulder, "No. 5 reports that he has heard galloping hoofbeats up the bench twice in the last half hour, and though he saw distant horsemen, 3, couldn't say whether they were Indians or cowboys." "Very good, sergeant," was the major's brief answer. "Send for the telegraph operator and my orderly." The sergeant turned. "One moment," called Ray. "Your pardon, Major. My first sergeant, too, and sergeant, have any sentries reported horses taken out from the stables to night?" "Not one, sir. and stanch and sturdy the commander of the guard stood ready to vouch for his men.